There we go. Now can we hear? Okay. Sorry about that.
Hey, Greg, I think the Zoom.
The Zoom is what?
Well, that one should.
That's fine. That's fine. It's the mic's on this one, which is different. So it doesn't matter what kind of architecture your transceiver is. All the functions essentially are the same. Most rigs have most of the functions. The higher end rigs have all the functions. That first picture I showed you was of a Yaesu FTDX 5000, and I just picked it because it had all kinds of buttons and knobs on it. And it was really a good rig, 10 years ago when it came out. It still is, yeah, exactly. So I do have a couple slides just so you can, well, what's going on? Let's do this. So this is kind of a traditional superhet layout. You might have like an IC 7300 where it's all SDR, or you might have like my new rig where it's a combination of a superhet front end into an SDR back end, but they all still do the same things. And so why would you do this? Well, it's really good if you like to chase DX, or if you really want to dial the other station in so it's nice and easy to listen to. You don't want to, have a lot of noise in the background. You like having the tone and the voices right. This is the way to do it. Or if you want to zero beat that signal so that you can respond to it, that's what these controls will help you do. It's a good way if you have noise, QRN or QRM. It doesn't help as much with fading, although it can. It can help with static crashes. It can help with all kinds of the problems that radio operators run into. And that's why they created these controls to try and make it so that you wouldn't have to suffer through predictable problems. So in any event, here's a list of some of the controls that are available. Now, you all know that there's a mode control. I've got a slide that'll show you how many different modes I have on my rig. It'll surprise you. There are band stacking registers in a lot of rigs, which will allow you to have different settings for different modes on a single band. And so it's not atypical to maybe set up like a Morse code CW setup where you have narrow roofing filters and you have audio peak filtering on, and you have, just different controls selected. And then you have different ones set for the SSB and different ones again when you do digital. And you just have to either push the band select button and it'll just cycle through those three options, or on mine, it's a menu selection because they got rid of the buttons. There's receiver incremental tuning, transmitter incremental tuning. There's tuner, so you can auto-sync tune or match your rig to the impedance of your antenna system. There's attenuators, there's preamplifiers, roofing filters, AGC, RF gain, audio gain, all the stuff that you can see up here. I won't read it to you. Each one of these plays a role when you are on your radio, depending on what you're trying to do. So that's a list of the modes on my radio. And I don't use most of them. I use upper and lower sideband. I use CWU, and I'll explain what that is. I've listened on AM a couple of times, and then I use data upper. So, but of all those, there's, who would have thought you had a separate upper and lower RIDI? So read the manual. So let's talk about receiver incremental tuning, because that's one of the first things that I run into in a contest. Sometimes people won't zero beat me, and they'll come back to me, and I can hear their Morse code, and it's a little low or a little high. I can use the RIT, or what they call in a Yaesu clarifier, and I can move my receive frequency up while still staying on my same primary VFO frequency. And I can dial them in so I can hear them, then I can come back. It helps a little bit, but a lot of people don't use it. The same with the transmit incremental tuning, but this just shifts the transmit frequency. It's a little different than when you operate split. And some CW operators will leave this XIT on, and they'll shift their frequency just a little bit. So they're transferring not at zero beat. So they can zero beat their rig, but their transmit signal will be a little bit or above or a little bit below. And it makes their signal sound a little lower or a little higher, which makes it easier for the guy that's running to pick them out of a pilot. And it's also a trick that you would use when you're chasing DX. Now, when you're chasing DX, you have the added complication that you'll be operating split, which we'll talk about in a minute. So
That sounds like a CW thing to do, right? You wouldn't do that so much.
probably not. Probably not.
You might want to distinguish.
Well,
Definitely on CW.
and sometimes in CW or in sideband, you'll end up narrowing down your roofing filter to try and get, so that you aren't hearing a lot of the interfering signals on either side. We'll have a slide about that later on. So if you think about when you get a DX station that you want to hear and they're down in the noise and you can barely get them, think about your transceiver from the receive chain going forward. So your RF comes in through the antenna. It goes typically to like an RF amplifier and then to a bandpass filter. And there's different bandpass filter tuned for each band. So you have these beautiful filters, and what that does is it allows the RF in between the top and bottom range of that filter to come through unattenuated, and it attenuates the heck out of the signals above and below that so that you can't hear them. And then it moves from there into to the preamp stage. So if you're listening and you're on a if you're listening to your signal and you're on the lower bands, say 30, 40, 60, 80, 160, those are normally really strong signals. And so what I do is I will slip in some attenuation. And on my rig, I have 3 levels of attenuation. A lot of ICOM rigs, like the 7300, I think there's just one level of attenuation. I think it's 20 dB. But on mine, it's 6, 12, or 18. And so on 40 meters, I'll run with 6 dB of attenuation and no preamp. And that quiets down a lot of the noise and allows the signal to come through. When you get to like 80 and 160, you might ratchet it up to where you do 12 or even 18 dB. And it'll make that signal pop out, because the way that works is if you have signal to noise over noise, if you drop the numerator denominator, that signal starts to pop up a little bit. Now, on the higher bands, say 20 on up, you don't have the problem of the noise. You might want to run a preamplifier. Now, this circuit, I pulled it out of my manual for my book. I don't think it's 100% right, but why am I questioning Yaesu? They have a circuit called an IPO, which is supposed to be no preamplification. In this diagram, it shows it going through one of the preamps. But the idea is every radio is designed for optimum conditions without a preamplifier so that the signals will sound the best. And that on a Yaesu radio is called IPO, intercept point optimization. If you want to switch into the preamp 1, you switch the signal. It doesn't go through the APO, it goes through the preamp. And you go through preamp 2, it stacks them, and you get the benefit of both of them. And so sometimes on 20, you might run preamp 1, but you get up to 10, you might want to run both of those preamps to make that signal stand out.
You might reiterate the fact that if you run the amplifier at this point, everything that's coming into the radio is getting amplified, noise and signal.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why you may not want to have any amplification at this point, but it's
noise dependent.
it very much so.
Yeah.
And then you may want to be attenuating signal and then amplifying later on to actually make the signal that you're interested in stand out. And there's no hard, fast rule.
No.
You've got to try it.
And you'd go through this process mentally every time you got that station. What can I do to make that station sound better? And you might try something and it doesn't work. I mean, I've tried it sometimes where I run up the attenuation and even do a preamp, and somehow the balance sounds a little better to my ear. It's probably worse on an engineering level, but it worked for me, so I did it.
But if you leave that amplifier on, you may have a pretty noisy.
Right. You'll have other issues down the road that you'll want to take care of. Now, the next control is this automatic gain control, and it's near and dear to my heart. I think I told Stu and Bob before, I had my radio, either due to operator error or something, I managed to switch off my AGC. And when I'd zero beat a CW signal, I got all kinds of unbelievable audio crud coming out of my rig. And I talked to Yaesu 6, 8, 10 times. I sent them pictures, I sent them audio, I sent them video, and they never could figure it out. They said, send your radio in. The guy looks at my radio, even though the picture showed the AGC was off, says, well, your AGC is off, dummy. So the AGC, it really does kind of two functions I've learned. One is to try and maintain that audio level so that it stays within an acceptable parameter. The other one that I did not know is that it's sort of the way you balance so that you don't overfeed all the digital processing that's coming in your radio after it goes through this far. And so if you aren't careful, you'll overload either the converter or the, well, I guess it's the digital signal processor, which has the problem, the ADC, analog to digital converter. So in any event, watch that. If your radio has automatic, the odds are you will leave AGC on automatic all the time. It's very rare when you're going to get a benefit from turning the AGC off. It can help, but I can tell you that if you turn AGC off and you're really listening to some guy and he's really down in the mud and you've got everything you think blocked out, and then some guy comes in to try and contact that station and he's running 1.5 kilowatts, you're going to hear every bit of that through your headphones as you tear them off. So the next thing you have is RF gain and AF gain. And so a lot of people, certainly in the old days, I don't think you need to do it quite as much, although there are some benefits to doing it, rolling back the RF gain and turning up the AF gain. And so you're watching for your needle to deflect, not because of the absolute value on your S meter, but if you're getting some deflection, you can kind of back off. What that does, it kind of works like a squelch. And so the signal's kind of below that new artificial floor that goes up as you turn the RF gain back. The S meter kind of keeps cranking up as you do that. And it kind of works like a squelch in that regard. And so you can kind of get rid of stuff that's down in the noise by doing that. So do that. Now there's a control called a noise blanker. And if you guys are operating mobile, you probably run into it. It's great for car ignition noise. And it's kind of a programmed thing where it's looking for periodic surges. And it's designed to smooth those out. And so you might have like a power line interference or something like that. And it's a good way to get rid of that. I don't use mine. Anybody use theirs very often? And for what purpose, Jim?
Mobile.
For mobile. Anybody non-mobile use it at a base station? Bob, why?
Yeah, every once in a while, if you have pulsating kind of noises, the noise blanker can take it out.
So just for pulsating noises is the moral of the story.
For my radios, it's like on or off. So the use of the button is easy. Turn it on, see if it does any good. If it does, leave it on. Otherwise, turn it back on.
Right. And there might be a little insertion loss. So not much.
What's that, the 991 mean? On
Yeah, probably 991, the FT 950. Yeah.
My 7100.
Because I think on some of the icons, it's variable.
Yeah, some of them have a variable adjust.
Yeah, my Yaesu, it's on or off.
No,
Although, but you can hold it down, you can adjust the setting from 1 to 10, I guess. That's right.
It's what I'm
But
meaning.
okay, digital noise reduction. A lot of people don't realize that these are kind of like algorithms that they run through. And it does function like you're going from 1 up to 10 or whatever your radio will go to. And they might have 15 settings. The more you use of the digital noise reduction, sometimes the lower the quality of the signal that you end up with. So kind of watch that. I use mine. It's astounding on the new radios how good that is. And you don't really need to go over 3 or 4 out of 15. But one of those things, try it. If it doesn't work on one setting, just keep changing settings to see if you can make it work. So it really lends itself well to when you're chasing a DX station and he's running and you're just listening to him and you're trying to tune it in so that you get him real clear. You might not have time to do this in a contest when you're trying to just boom, 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 log the contacts. Now, notch filters are a different beast. They allow you to take out an entire section of the passband that is in your IF passband. And so on some of the newer radios, you can adjust both the width and the depth. But basically, you can block it out. And an example of when I've used it is there's a bunch of guys on 7155 in the morning, and there was a station that would send CW right in the middle of their audio. And you could hear it crystal clear. And you could notch it out, not hear it at all. And so you just click the notch, and the notch then adjusts up and down in frequency. You can normally see it if you have an FFT window for your audio passband. You can see it moving in there, and it'll notch out. Some people like them set wide. I like them set narrow. It's in my mind, it works well if it's set narrow for the sideband guys, because then you don't lose as much of the audio. And if you set it wide, you might lose more of the audio and it might not sound as good.
Notch filters are a wonderful device because nobody these days has purchased a dummy load. And it takes them an hour and a half to tune up on an adjacent frequency. And thank God for giving us notch filters.
Well, and there's also a digital notch filter, which is slightly different. It's sort of the automated brother of this controllable notch filter that you can steer around and you can see in the audio passband. So if you have a little display like the 7300, I think has it, and certainly the Asus have it, where you can just see where that notch is relative to the signal you're listening to. But the digital notch filter is really good at getting the guy that tunes up and getting people where the noise is moving around and your notch, where you have multiple sources of noise, you might be able to digital notch it out, which is a good solution. So it's worth trying if you run into that. Now, the IF notch filter works like this, and I just thought it was kind of a cool little diagram. But you can see how the gray area is where the signal's coming through, and that little deep notch is where they just blocked it out completely. And you can see the offending station and where you run that notch and it just goes away. Very cool. Contour is a Yaesu thing. I don't know if the ICOM radios have it, but it's a little bit like a notch control. It's a little wider and a little shallower. You can adjust both the depth and the width. And you can also invert it so you can peak the signal. And so a lot of Yaesu owners will flip it and they'll peak the signal and they'll be able to hear that signal more clearly than the signals around it. It'll just be a little brighter, if you will. So, and then you can use all these together, which is sort of the moral of the story. Now, there's also a shift and a width control. So this gray area, you can adjust the width, bring it in, bring it out. And so like on my radio, I've got a bandpass filter that's a crystal filter. And then when everything gets converted to the intermediate frequency, there's one set of filters that are designed at that intermediate frequency, and they're crystal and they're really good filters. And that's the way all these radios are these days, except I suspect the ICOM 70. If it's a pure SDR radio, they may not have a crystal bit in there. What it'll be is all signal processing to do the same thing. But you can narrow down. So I have a roofing filter that takes the signal after it comes through. So it goes antenna, roofing, or antenna through the bandpass filter, and then we go through the preamp attenuation stage, and then it gets converted to an intermediate frequency. And once it gets to that intermediate frequency, I have a roofing filter, and the roofing filter tells me how wide a swath of that signal I want to see. And so I will set that in CW. If I'm searching and pouncing, I'll set it real narrow. If I'm running, I'll set it a little bit wider. And then they have a setting for sideband, and they have a different setting for AM because those signals are wider. And then these are, in my radio and some of the older radios, these are crystal filters that attenuate everything outside of that passband. And then you have a digital control in more modern radios that allows you to shrink that or expand that even further after you get to that stage. And that's what this width control does. And the width is be the next slide, but you can see a picture of how the IF bandwidth here, you could expand it out if you wanted to. You typically, to get clarity, will be shrinking it down and not expanding it. And then you can shift that signal to the right or left. So what you're talking about is the bandpass. So you've got your signal in the middle and the bandpass is moving. The signal you're tuned to isn't moving. So that means that if you have an interfering signal that is in the bandpass, you could shift everything so it's no longer in the bandpass. And I think that's what that third slide or third picture on the right shows. The QRMs there, we shift over, and that makes the QRM outside the passband, so I don't have to listen to them. And this is the IF width slide, and so you can adjust the width too. And then once again, do it all together. In this one, there's two signals, one to the left and one lower, one higher. And so what they did first is they shrank it so that the one that was higher was outside the passband, and then they shifted to get rid of the other one. And so you get rid of those signals, and then you've got the one that you want to hear. He's right there. Now, what a lot of people will do, and I hear it's really popular with the ICOM crowd, the 7300s, is you can use a combination of these things. And so what you do is you set a wide notch filter below your intended frequency, and then you shift to the down with your IF passband, and then you end up attenuating all the signals above and notching out all the signals below, and then you get just the signal you want to hear. And so what you're doing is you're getting rid of these other signals, and then with the addition of the notch and narrowing the width, you're also cutting out noise. Every time you add attenuation, you're reducing that level of noise that gets attenuated. So it's a really slick way. And I've seen these guys tune these radios in like a 7300. If you play with it enough, you can get to where you just hear that one station and no noise at all, no static, nothing. It's astounding what you can do, but it takes a little bit of time and effort to do it.
If you go back for a second.
Sure.
This gets really important if the bands are really active in a contest or something where, and I'm talking single sided, I'm not doing it. But the typical filter is about 2.4 kilohertz wide, which is the audio range. But if somebody tunes up or starts talking 2 kilohertz away, you're going to get a good portion of their audio in your passband. And it's just a really simple thing just to narrow up the width. And it may block that interfering signal. Now, you lose some intelligibility when you do that, but better to be able to understand or hear the guy as opposed to lose a little bit of that or get blocked out by the other guy. Or the other thing is that you just shift the IF a little bit because now you take it down, you're not narrowing it. So you got two options. And if you've got a long QSO, you can, as Greg said, just make it comfortable to listen to by adjusting that.
But when you're dealing with those sideband things, as you shift or narrow, the signal quality goes down, and it starts to sound a little tinnier, and it's not quite as pleasant to listen to. So, once again, your mileage will differ. Now, I thought I'd talk briefly about speech processing and parametric mic controls. I'm not going to give a lesson on all this. The real moral of the story is to make sure that you try into a dummy load and listen to yourself if you can monitor, and then also get on the air and ask Jim for what do they call it, Jim? A signal report or a radio report?
If you want your radio checked, you got to bring it to me. If you want a signal report, I can give it to you over the air.
All right. So I just love this cute little diagram. I will try and explain it briefly. So there are 9 parameters that you can change, I think, if I got it right. So you have the low, the middle, and the high frequency range, and that's like left to right. You can change the amplitude, which is up and down, which means you can accentuate or you can reduce. And then you can adjust the width of that little bell curve that's there. And a lot of people don't realize that when you do that, you're adjusting the Q and you're not adjusting the width. And the Q affects the width, but it's reverse. So if you end up with a high Q, it's narrow, low Q is wider. So that's the one trick that I hope that you take away from this one slide, is that it's a Q adjustment, not a width adjustment. So a couple others, you knew you weren't going to get away without some CW stuff. The main controls that you have there are break-in, and your choices are full QSK or semi break-in. I run semi. A lot of the really good guys can run full QSK. I can't do it because when I'm sending, I hear the other guy coming back at me and I forget what I'm sending. There are keyer settings, A and B, and the modern rigs all have something like an ACS, which will automatically adjust the spacing. So no matter how fast you're sending, it's sending with constant gaps between. Side tone frequency, you can set it for whatever you're hearing, whatever you like. I run mine about 500 hertz. Some of the big contesters will run down as low as 400 hertz. And they do that because it's easier for them to pick out people in pileups. And so just briefly, when you're running CW, it's a carrier. And you saw in the modes, mine has CW U and CWL, which you think lower and upper sideband. It's not exactly that, because it's really that one carrier. What happens is they run it through another mixer, and that mixer creates the side tone. And that side tone is created on the upper side, like an upper sideband audio, because the carrier is at 0 hertz, and that's outside my hearing range. So I set mine at 500 hertz, and that's a nice convenient thing. Now, we'll talk about where that makes difference, but that's an audio signal that I'm getting. And so if there's another signal that's at 500 hertz, he's going to be right in the middle of my hearing. So if I switch to lower sideband, CWL, I won't hear that signal anymore. It's like going from upper to lower sideband. But I'm not really shifting the CW tone because that's at 0. CW auto mode, I had a question about this. I don't think the ICOM 7300 has it. It's kind of a slick thing. It's where you can send CW when you're in upper or lower sideband without going to CW mode. And so one of the guys that asked the question said that he was listening to the sidebanders on 75 meters, and they were IDing with CW during their conversations. There's a Zen or spot, 0 in for Zen and spot. On mine, there's a little scope, and you can 0 beat the frequency with that. Most of the modern rigs, you can push the button while the other guy's transmitting. It'll 0 beat them. There are advantages to being 0 beat, especially if you're doing a QSO with the guy. There can be disadvantages in a contest if the other 40 people trying to talk the guy are 0 beat or DXing. There's another thing called an APF, audio peak filter, which is a CW only function. And what it does is it'll peak a frequency. And so on mine, if my side tone is set 500, I'll have it peak 500 hertz. And so it'll make that 500 hertz sound pop out and then really steep fall off on either side. So if you're outside of that really steep fall off, I won't hear you. So it's really nice if you want a good crisp signal from the other guy. If you're running and the people that are trying to call back aren't into 0 beating and they're all over the board, you may not hear them, so you might want to turn it off. And we talked about the CW lower and upper.
Greg, if you're not 0 beat, and now if you're just tuning to the frequency preference, you may not be transmitting back on the same frequency he's transmitting on. Is that the reason you would zero beat?
Well, that, and you want to hear better. You want to get lined up so that you're sending back on the same frequency he's sending to you. So there's a real plus to doing it, and really most people will zero beat. And you can do it three ways. You can push the button, which there's some lazy people will do that. You can look at your little scale, and mine has a little slider, and when it's in the center, you're zero beat. Or you can use your ears. And that's what they did for decades, is you just listen until the signal sounded good. And that's how you zero beat a sideband guy. Bob didn't.
Yeah, I'll do it the right way.
All right, a brief description of split operation. I don't know if I suspect some of these DXers have done split. That's about the only time I run into it, is a DXer or a DXer working in a contest at the same time. There's an AB switch, which will flip-flop the frequencies between VFO and VA and VFOB. There's an A2B switch, which will dump the frequency from A into the B. And so if you think about it, if you want to switch that, you can just flip-flop them and then dump it. So you can do it different ways. There's a split operation where you just touch the split button and it automatically enables you to listen on one and transmit on another, VFO. Now, if you are one of these guys that has a diversity receive transceiver, like a 7610 or the new K4, a radio that actually has two receivers in it, you can actually operate those two as two separate transceivers. Most rigs don't have that. They just have the ability to have two different frequencies tuned in at the same time, and then you can switch between them. You can't do them simultaneously. And similarly, you can't listen to two different frequencies simultaneously. There are guys that can do that with a diversity receive, and they use stereo headphones, and one frequency comes in one ear and the other frequency comes in the other ear. And there's guys that do that when they're running SO2R, which is single operator 2 radio, and they do it with CW. But there's also an auto split function where you push that split button and you hold it down for a second, and then it automatically sets your radio so that, and there's a default setting, it's normally 5 kilohertz. And what happens is when you push that, it'll set the VFOB 5 kilohertz higher, and that'll be the frequency you're transmitting on. And so when you're listening to the DX station, they will say up, or they'll say up 5, or they'll say up 3. And what they mean is set that VFO that you're going to transmit on, so you're transmitting 3 kilohertz above where we are. And so you can set that automatically. A lot of the CW guys, it's only up 1 or up 1.5. And some of these guys, if there's a big crowd, what they'll do is they'll start like at 1 and then kind of roll up to 5 and then go back and roll up. And so they're constantly moving where they're listening to the signals. And so this control will set it at your automatic. You can still switch to the BVFO and tune it. And what you do is on my rig, there's a TWX function, which allows me to hear the upper frequency. So I can hear what's on VFOB by pressing that button. And what you're listening for is the guy's going to be calling on frequency A, and you're listening to him, and he says up. And then if you push this button, you're going to hear what the guys are doing in response to that. And if you're good at listening, you'll find out that he works the last guy in, he works the guy that's a little high, he works the guy that's a little bit low, he works the guy that's slow, he works the guy that's fast. And you'll know then how to respond when you want to be heard by him. And then that TWX button is just kind of a momentary press. I mean, you hold it as long as you want to listen to it. As soon as you let off, you're back to your normal operation. Okay, so the moral of all this is there's a lot of buttons, a lot of knobs. Read your manual. If you go too narrow, too shifted, the notch in the wrong place, you might lose some intelligibility. Don't do what I did. Turn your AGC on, turn it on automatic. It'll save you a lot of brain damage. If you use RIT or XIT, remember when you do it. On my radio, it's easy to bump that and you find out that the last 3 or 4 contacts you had receiver incremental tuning on and you didn't intend to. Settings can lead to unintentional results. So now, if you have questions, I'm going to try to answer them. Bob will help me, and Stu will help me, and Lauren will help me. So does anybody have any questions about all this stuff?
How about the ALC knob?
What do you mean, how about it, Jim? How do you use yours?
Well, that's where I differ from you about reading the manual. If you read the manual and you set the ALC level as per the manual, you'll splatter all over the band. You'll find that you need very, very little mic gain on most of these radios. For example, my 7610 has mic gain from 0 to 100. My mic gain is at 5. My KX3 has 0 to 60. It's at 14. Same thing with my Kenwood. All you got to do is tune around the band, and you can see how misadjusted most people's audio is. It does you no good to crank the ALC knob wide open and throw all that power into outside the bandpass effectively. And it's one of the major issues these days with people setting the audio. You just set that audio, and if you hardly want to touch the upper end of the ALC indication. Mid-range to 3/4 will do you just fine.
And the manuals all say, go top it up.
They say,
and you don't want to do that. And with the modern radios, you can see the splattering signals. There's several of those guys on at about 9 in the morning.
155.
Right, 155. And they will tell you, no, that's your SDR. It's just too sensitive.
They're 10 kC wide.
But the other thing this brings up is that, the parametric controls I told you about, if you don't turn your mic gain on, those parametric controls won't work. So the only time you get them to work is if the mic gain's on. So one of the options is not to have any mic gain. Well, that's fine, but you won't get the parametric equalizer and you won't get the speech processing because there's a companion. I didn't mention this. There's a companion setting that you can adjust for when you want to do speech processing, and that will enable you to give more punch to your SSB signal when you're trying to contest. And so you have the original 9 settings, plus you got the other 9 settings. So a lot of radios, there's a lot of settings you can go through if you want to do that. But if you don't turn that on, it won't matter. And you have to manually turn it on to have it work. Yes, Tim.
So on the 991A, maybe somebody else can tell us, but the parametric mic settings, is it possible to have 2 different users or 2 different settings on that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
From a YL voice to a non-YL. So we need to buy another radio.
Well, now we know. So simple.
The other thing on the ALC is compression. And as soon as you press that compression button on, you got to go back and look at the ALC, because as soon as you press that compression button, up goes the ALC off the scale. And, for most rag shoe situations, compression, you don't need it. If you want to get on the air in the contest and scream with the rest of us old folks, then maybe a little bit of compression helps the situation. A little bit. A little bit.
So what's the best way of judging what your audio is like, other than, hey, how's my audio over the air?
That's probably the worst thing. There's all manner of cartoons out there where, you'll see a guy with the ALC cranked wide open. He's asking for a signal report. And the guy says, oh, you sound just fine. And here's a picture of the spectrum, and he's 10 kC wide. A good way that I do a lot is if you have a second receiver, look at it, okay? Listen to it. Listen to yourself back on that second receiver.
WebSDR
And WebSDR.
is also a good way.
Yeah.
And you can make recordings off of it and save notes about those recordings, about what your settings were. So that's also a good.
Yeah.
WebSDR is a great
Effectively
tool.
Second receiver if you don't have one in your house.
Yeah.
And the Utah SDR is one of the best ones out there. It works fantastic. And I think most people on 40 meters, nearly any time of the day or night can hit the Utah SDR from here.
Yes, definitely use WebSDR. Anything else?
What's the most useless feature?
Useless?
The button that you think you have to change, but it doesn't really do you a whole lot.
Well, it just depends on where you are. And, every one of those little buttons and knobs and controls was invented to solve some sort of a problem. And so you're going to run into the situation that you never thought you would. And then, oh, yeah, that'd be a great time to, hit my, digital notch filter or whatever. So there are a lot of those buttons and knobs that you don't use on a daily basis. But if you, but if you, but if you need them, it's nice to know they're there and nice to remember a little bit about them so you can do the setting. Some of these are a lot more involved. And so it's not like you're going to adjust the parametric equalizer while you're trying to reach a guy on a DX thing. That's something you do when you got time in the shack,
A good thing on that parametric or the transmit EQ is to go to the Heil website. And they have nearly every radio listed on that website with some basic settings for the transmit EQ. And they're pretty darn close. You can do some fine tuning on them, but that's a good starting point for setting up the transmit EQ.
What website is that?
Heil.
Bob Heil,
Bob Heil.
Oh,
the sound guy. Bob.
A couple comments. First one is the feature I love the most is the variable bandwidth knob on the IF. Because back in the olden days, the IF selection was always like 3 crystal filters, right? You get maybe 3 kilohertz, 500 hertz, and maybe you get an extra wide one for AM. And now all the radios let you dial that in, and that is so sweet. So you may be sitting there at 3 kilohertz, listening to sideband. Somebody comes in, a little close, so you dial down to like 2.4, maybe a little further, and you narrow it up, and you get rid of that interference as you described. That's still magic to me.
And I use my width all the time. And when you're doing CW and you get in a crowded, like in a contest area, you can narrow it. I bring it all the way down to 50 hertz. And you can still get the signal and make the cue.
And the other comment I wanted to mention on RIT or the clarifier, you kind of mentioned it, but the one important use of that is there are a number of reasons why a station's transmit frequency and receive frequency may not be perfectly aligned. It may be the transmitter has an offset in it, or maybe the person operating the radio always has a habit of tuning the receiver 100 hertz high or something off of 0 beat or whatever reason. And so if you have that situation, they're transmitting at you, and you listen to them, and you go, oh, I'm going to tune him in, and so you move, and then when you transmit back, the other station does the same thing. They go, oh, I got to retune. And so you need another 200 or 300 hertz.
True.
And if you keep doing that, you will literally move up or down the band. But what the RIT does, it breaks that phenomenon. It leaves your transmitter exactly where it was. So the other guy is going to hear the same thing you heard before. And you tweak your receiver into whatever sounds right to you, and it'll be stable that way.
Good point. Good. Yes.
So maybe it's a type of learning, but I read through the manual and I watch YouTube videos where people are trying to explain stuff. And I'm having a hard time applying like like having a hands-on demonstration would probably cement in a lot of things for me. And I don't know, are there opportunities we can make for something like that, or?
We could do something like that. Of course, there's some YouTube videos that are out there where the guy, I forget the guy's name now, but he has this wonderful thing about how he chases DX, and he does it with his FTDX 5000, he does it with his 991, does it with 7300, and he compares and contrasts. And so you can listen to the audio and then see him adjusting the knobs. He tells you what he's going to do, and then he switches to the other rig, and you can listen to the difference. And it's pretty interesting.
Would you suggest that maybe searching for DXing videos might be more productive? Because I just kind of looked at general, ICOM 7300.
Well, the guy I'm thinking of has 50 videos on the new FTDX 10, and in there he's got 3 or 4 videos on how to chase DX, or how to bring in like a soda station that you're having a hard time hearing. And he talks about doing all these adjustments, and he does them kind of in a sequence, and he's got an attack process. And I would definitely do that. But it always starts out the same way. Like I said, attenuate first. If that doesn't help, try the preamp. If that doesn't help, move into the roofing filter, adjust that. And then you do these IF controls, which include moving the width and shift and contour and notch. But that's all at the IF stage.
A real good set of videos out there. It's about 26 parts on how the 7300 works in these knobs and stuff like that. It's really pretty good. And there's another one on Yaesu that's very similar. But one of the things you have to be cognizant of is, ever since there's iPhones, as soon as the ink is dry on some of these technicians' license, they're suddenly a YouTube expert. Okay, and here they go, and all of the information that is coming out is just bogus.
Yeah.
So you got to take those YouTube things with a little bit of grain of salt.
But it's great because you listen to these things and you try it and it doesn't work. Well, don't try it again. It doesn't work. So, but what I listened to this guy, and he had this signal, and by the time, it was so far in the mud, you could barely make it out. When he was done, it was crystal clear. It was the only signal in the radio. There was no noise, no interference, nothing. But it took him a while to get there.
But for a beginner, the good thing about the receiver is when you make an adjustment, you usually hear, okay, did I make it better, or I made it worse?
Right. It's not as bad as going to the ophthalmologist, which is better, this one or that one.
But you have to have a real radio, listening to the signals.
But you can do some of those adjustments on the web SDR. You can adjust the bandwidth. You can move it up and down. So there are some. It's not like having a radio in your shack, though. Anybody else? We're going to finish early. Well, unless somebody has something they want to talk about, we could adjourn early, I guess. Yes, Joyce?
Thanks to whoever brought snacks today.
I'll bet Ben did that.
Yeah.
Ben's been our snack person. Appreciate it. Thank you. And anything else? Everybody going to come November 15 for our next meeting? We will let everybody know what the presentation will be here shortly. Yes, Daryl.
There's I was trying to remember the name of it. There's a book out there, if you can get a hold of a copy. It's called The Complete DXer. It's an excellent book, and it goes over a lot of these techniques that you're talking about for how to chase the guy in the middle of a pylon.
The Complete DXer, it's an ARRL book, as I recall.
Yeah, excellent book.
So are you in the exit?
Amateur DXer,
But we got a guy in the room here who's got 334.
I am, I can share a lot.
And contest, yeah.
Who's got, let's see, we got one that's got 334. So that's a pretty good number. So I got about 100. So I got a long way.
I have friends who have many more than I do, but there's a new contest, new-ish, called Challenge Point. And I have one friend who's won the top award there, but their top award is, I think, 3,000 points. That's countries counted separately on each band from 160 to 6. Now, to get 3,000 points, you need to average 300 countries on each band separately, including 6 meters. Now, I have 9-band DXCC, 100 or more countries on each of 9 bands, but I'm only halfway there on 6 meters. So when I put up a tower, there's going to be a big 6 meter beam.
Wow.
You just have countries. We've got countries per band. We got and they got the challenge points. And I have one friend who actually has the 3,000 challenge points. It's got a nice.
Well, we'll have to get a DX presentation up here.
Yeah, I think I'm only at 2,250 challenge points. So
Wow.
far. It's not nearly.
But for those of you with more humble aspirations, you know, on a weekend, you can do work all states if you do contest weekend. You can get them. You can get all the Canadian provinces. You know, guys do it all the time. So it's within the reach of people with 100 watts and a wire. So you don't need these super stations. Just telling everybody, I listened to a super station on Saturday. The guy explained K3LR, Tim Duffy, and what.
Yeah.
He lost me at the 4 high, 4 element, 40 meter beams on a 275-foot tower.
No, you don't need any. About a dozen of us helped a friend back in Maryland put a hex beam on a small monopole attached to his garage. He now has 2,000 challenge points. He has DXCC. He has, I think he has 8 band DXCC. You don't.
All with the hex beam attached to a pole next to his garage.
What you need is to sit in front of the radio and operate. He doesn't do CW. He doesn't do RIDI. It's all
sideband?
Sideband.
Wow.
So even with a limited station, you can, if you're willing to operate, you can do remarkable things.
Is he still married?
He's married to his hex beam.
His wife is downstairs and he's upstairs.
He's still married.
That's Dave.
All right. Well, I guess if there is nothing else, we're adjourned. Come back on the 15th.
All right.
Thank you.